Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're so excited to see all of you today and talk about osteoporosis with Sherri. We have a lot to cover today. As you know, Sherri is a wealth of information when it comes to osteoporosis. And so we're super excited to have her with us today. She's actually going to be telling us, answering lots and lots of questions, which is always fun, but also telling us about a newly published paper. So Sherri, why don't you guys all know Sherri. I hope you all do. One of my very, very closest friends. And so tell us what you've been up to. What are you doing?
Oh, I'm just really excited to be here with you, Shelly. And we have so enjoyed working together, and we did not call each other about the color.
That's true.
We're still Shellery. And so I've been doing my little practice here in Monroe, Louisiana, and seeing half and half telehealth and doing lots of webinars and consulting on osteoporosis. So that has been wonderful. I speak a lot for physician groups who want to know the best exercise for osteoporosis and what to recommend to their patients and how to find a good physical therapist or exercise teacher who is safe and effective with osteoporosis. So that has been just a big part of my practice. And I feel like COVID has actually made my practice even more of what I want it to be. So I have actually, that's been the silver lining with the pandemic, is that it is exactly what I want to be doing. And I love doing a little bit of telehealth and a little bit of on-site, because I would never want to sit in front of a screen all day long. And I don't necessarily want to be working with my hands all day long either. So it gives me a chance to put a telehealth patient in between, let my hands rest, so I can do some more deep tissue and manual therapy work, mobilization with my patients. So I love it. And I love teaching the live classes too. The exercise classes are super fun. We did that all through the pandemic and kept people moving. So that has been great.
Yeah, it's nice to see that silver lining, because there have been a lot of those. I love connecting with clients now, and we have clients that take classes from the studio in Miami who don't live in Miami anymore. I don't live in Miami anymore. So it's been a really nice way to reconnect with people. And then now the joy of being live with people too, being in the same room. That's also great. So
right. And I also love my garden, and I've just been gardening like crazy. I have tomatoes, I have lots of flowers, hydrangeas everywhere. And this year is my petunia year. I have never grown petunias before, and I have these crazy petunias that are just, they're called proven winners, and they're the bubblegum vista that are just, they're like petunias on crack, man. They just spread everywhere. It's like, if you don't have a green thumb, plant those, water them. They'll be great.
Love it. That's cool. Well, did you want to start with maybe introducing the paper? I know you had some things to tell us about.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen here. I've jumped right into the page where we started. We actually did two papers. Let me go ahead and open that all the way up. All right, so we did two papers. What we found when we started researching the clinical practice guidelines for physical therapists in the management of patients with either suspected or known osteoporosis, we discovered that we needed to be guiding physical therapists on how to do an assessment of a patient with osteoporosis. We felt like there was a lot of variations in practice patterns for physical therapists dealing with osteoporosis, and they were doing forward bending testing. And, we really wanted to hone in on what they should be looking at with patients who may have osteoporosis. So we did a survey, and it's very similar to a survey that was done by Osteoporosis Canada. The group led by Laura John Gregorio did the Too Fit to Fracture consensus, of which Kathy Shipp, you may know, and Stuart McGill were part of. And they polled exercise teachers who are so-called experts in not physical therapists, but and physical therapists, and who were so-called experts in working with osteoporosis, because there's no certification program, there's no specific training for physical therapists to learn about how to work with osteoporosis. So we felt like that was lacking and needed to be provided. So this is the outcome of that survey. Some of you on this call may have been part of that survey. We only polled US therapists who were specialists, and you may have been part of that polling process. And the Delphi system is what we use to do a specific polling process. And it's a very systemized approach that gives the best evidence. And so specific to osteoporosis, we think you should be looking at current medications associated with fall risk and bone loss. You need to look at bone health related comorbidities. So something like if somebody has a thyroid problem, they have diabetes, they've had cancer treatment, anything that would put them at higher risk for bone loss. Histories of fracture, we know that one fracture highly predicts future fractures. So if somebody's had a fracture, certainly a fragility fracture, which is a fall from a standing height or less, they are more at risk for another fracture. Results from prior bone mineral density testing and imaging studies are very important to know how to look at. So you need to get some training on looking at a DEXA scan and any imaging that would be related to that as well. So something like a vertebral fracture assessment should be familiar to the therapist working with that. And I am kind of talking to physical therapists right now because this paper was targeting physical therapists, but it can certainly help the exercise teacher because our next paper was focused on exercise.
Wonderful.
Generalizable to anyone would be history of falls, near falls, and fear of falling, history of exercise and physical activity. You want to know what has the person been doing and what are they currently doing? And then tests and measures would be how to quantify thoracic kyphosis. Now that's going to be with a flexible ruler, a kyphometer, a Cobb angle, a rib to pelvis, not rib to pelvis, but occiput to wall distance are easy ways to quantify thoracic kyphosis. And some are a little bit more complicated, but you need to do at least that. So one of those forms. And generalizable to all would be assessment of static and dynamic balance related outcomes like the tug test and things like that, and 4 square step tests. There's all different kinds of balance related tests, observational gait analysis, so looking at how they walk, and functional lower extremity strength. I've often said so many times that I can watch a patient get up out of a chair and walk across the room and put together their whole exercise program. It tells me whether or not their arms are strong or pushing them up, whether or not their legs are strong, are they hinging at their hips, are they rounding their back, do their knees come together, do they have poor balance?
all the time that you were in Miami and all the clients in Miami that you either saw or knew or they saw you, I don't know how many of them still will say, well, Sherri said that we should have, all the springs on, or Sherri said we need to be able to do such and such. And it's so funny because you weren't there you weren't there 10 years, you were just a few years that you were in Miami. And I don't know how many people talk about lower extremity strength and all the things that you used to just, mention even in passing in the studio. So people listen. It's pretty,
I know,
it's pretty
that's great.
cool.
Especially
Yeah,
people that are in the Pulsar centers, they're really hungry for information.
Yeah.
So love that. So then, of course, education items. You want to be able to educate your patient on fracture prevention strategies and how to slow down the rate of bone loss, especially for postmenopausal women and men, older men, not postmenopausal. And then patient should demonstrate knowledge and application of exercise program that emphasizes bone safe posture as well as resistance, aerobic, balance, and flexibility. So resistance and dynamic balance are some of the most important things to affect bone health. You need to make sure that they know how to perform safe postures and they understand what postures might be unsafe for both exercise and for activities of daily living. And then everyone needs to understand fall risk reduction and safe pain modulating activities, because often the person is coming to us because they have pain, need to address that first and then start to think about exercise. And then specific to osteoporosis, the interventions are going to be, as I said before, education on posture, body mechanics, activity modifications to reduce their fracture risk, especially during daily activities and also during exercise. We need to make sure that they understand that they might need to do, like a frail older adult might need to do bone healthy body mechanics patterns as exercise. And that might be reaching up into the cabinet and stretching a few times overhead, or learning how to pick up a box from the floor, carrying their groceries. And then when they bring their groceries in, maybe they do a few squats while they're doing their putting away their groceries. And then education on posture, body mechanics, and activity modification, not just for bone density, but to reduce fall risk. Because the easiest way to get a fracture is to fall. That's in the spine and the hip and the wrist. And then resistance exercise and balance training, as I said before. So that was kind of the summary of the Delphi, and that was a super quick summary. But we're going to have the gang at Polestar, Melissa will send you the full documents in the follow-up. So I've provided her with a bunch of different, for some reason I can't forward my slide. I've sent her a bunch of different documents to share with you guys. All right, so the other thing that changed based on our results from the Delphi study was that we recommended that physical therapists create a long-term plan of care. Usually we see people 2 times a week for 8 weeks, maybe 12 weeks to address their low back pain. And then they are not ready to start any bone loading exercises. They're not really ready to do things that are going to help their bone density. They're just basically trying to get out of pain. Then in phase 2, we're going to start teaching them the bone targeted exercise program, and that might last for 9 months, once a week. And they might do a phase 3 program where they check in once a month for 1 year, and then a periodic check-in every 6 months after that. So we're looking at lifelong management, not just, we're just going to see the therapist 2 times a week for 8 weeks. We're going to actually write this plan of care so that we stretch it out a lot longer. So they may use the same number of visits as they would normally use in a 2 to 3 times a week scenario, but we stretch it out as long as we can, especially when we know that we are dealing with osteoporosis.
Right.
All right, so let's look at the main paper that looks at the evidence-based guidelines for osteoporosis. So we had a working group that worked for about 4 years on this document, and we are thrilled to have it published. The document, the process for looking for information involved looking at current CPGs, and CPG is just an acronym for clinical practice guidelines. So there is a repository of clinical practice guidelines that you can go through, and we had a librarian that specializes in this to help us look. And what we selected was the SIGN document, which is a Scottish Intercollegiate Guidelines Network document that had a really good section on exercise recommendation. So we selected this document to adapt using a process called the Agree to adaptation process. So we went to Washington, D.C., where the headquarters of the APTA is, and learned how to adapt this document in a systematic process. We wrote a new paper, and we found that most of the recommendations for the Scottish document were derived from the Powell Cochrane review of 55 exercise trials that were high quality, randomized controlled trials that recommended exercise that affected bone density. So I'm going to share some of that evidence with you. These were the definitions that were described in this particular paper, the Cochrane review, and it included static weight-bearing exercise, dynamic weight-bearing exercise with low force. And that meant dynamic to them meant that they were on their feet, and that low force meant it was just walking, maybe, or Tai Chi. You're not jumping or running. The dynamic weight bearing with high force was jogging, jumping, running, and dancing. And then basically, if your feet leave the ground, or if both feet leave the ground, that was dynamic weight bearing with high force. Then there's another category called non-weight bearing exercise with low force. So this would be like Pilates or yoga. Like you're on the mat, you're not in weight bearing, you're either seated, you're on a mat, and you're exercising. So more like calisthenic type exercise, Pilates or yoga type exercise on the mat. Then non-weight bearing exercise with high force, which is at the gym doing like bench press, leg press in seated position, leg extensions, hamstring curls, rowing, those kind of things that you would do in a circuit, at a gym. That was a big preponderance of the studies that were included in this Cochrane review. Then combination exercise, which makes it a little bit more messy, was looked at with combined exercises that included 1 or more or 2 or more of the exercises above. And so that makes trials a little bit more messy, but they did categorize some of the trials as combined. If they included, say, a walking program and some strength training, that would be a combined exercise program. So then the effects of these types of exercise was categorized into postmenopausal and premenopausal. Unfortunately, men were not included in a lot of these trials, so they pretty much eliminated the whole category of the the male gender. Static weight-bearing exercise showed a slow decline at the hip, or slowed the decline at the hip of postmenopausal women, and had no effect on premenopausal women. So if you just stood on one leg, a postmenopausal woman would benefit from that, but a premenopausal woman might not. And then dynamic weight-bearing exercise with low force, which was, again, walking or Tai Chi, was shown to slow the decline at the lumbar spine in postmenopausal women, and it had no effect on premenopausal women. Dynamic weight-bearing exercise with high force has no effect in postmenopausal women and slows the decline at the femoral neck in premenopausal women. So this is interesting to me. Jumping and jogging, high impact activities actually have not been shown in those 55 reviews or 55 papers to have an effect in postmenopausal women. So it may be that they didn't include very many jumping studies in postmenopausal women because of the risk of fracture or the fear of fracture, but that was definitely mentioned.
Interesting.
Non-weight bearing exercise with low force has no effect on either postmenopausal or premenopausal. So this is kind of sad for us that just Pilates, if you just do Pilates or yoga, you're probably not going to have much effect. However, if you go down here and you look at combined exercise, you combine yoga with Tai Chi, or yoga with walking, yoga with strength training, Pilates with walking, strength training, so if you do two of the above types, as long as it's in one of these categories, you're going to see effects in both postmenopausal and premenopausal women, which is really great, right? You see the slowing of the femoral neck and the lumbar spine, and then increase possibly in the femoral neck and lumbar spine of premenopausal women.
Right.
So then that leaves us with the non-weight bearing exercise high force category. And that is the gym exercise. That's kind of like the circuit I mentioned. You do see effects in both postmenopausal and premenopausal women from the gym exercise.
Right.
Yes, Shelly.
Where would the Pilates equipment, would that also fall into low?
That has never been. Pilates was actually not in, I think was maybe in one or two of the trials in those 55. So it didn't have a great presence there in those trials, but it would still be categorized into that low force, non-weight bearing. But Pilates apparatus has not really been studied very much because it's harder to study with large groups. And but I do have some recommendations about Pilates coming up, and I did include Pilates apparatus that I think would be helpful and how to modify it. All right, so then postmenopausal women, again, this is just a summary in writing of the things I just said. So I don't want to reiterate that too much, but sometimes I think it's easier to look at a chart. So again, this is postmenopausal effects, and I highlighted the postmenopausal effects. So you're going to either need to do high force dynamic weight bearing exercise in premenopausal women. It says postmenopausal at the top, but this is premenopausal. So premenopausal women need high force, either dynamic weight bearing or high force at the gym, right? Or they need to do combined exercise, okay? And then here's again the summary of what I just mentioned. And then for men, there was insufficient evidence to make a recommendation. So we recommend that they follow the guidelines for the women based on their age. If they're over 50, they do the postmenopausal. If they're under 50, they do the premenopausal. Here's the two fit to fracture consensus that I mentioned, that one of my heroes, Laura John Gregorio, is the leader, the principal investigator for their group. She's a kinesiologist at Osteoporosis Canada, and she's at University of Waterloo, and she does work for Osteoporosis Canada, putting together such wonderful resources, such as this booklet, the Two Fit to Fracture for patients. And then they also have some really great videos at Osteoporosis Canada that are video vignettes that you can go through and look at if you're an exercise teacher and you want to say, okay, this person has osteopenia, they want to do more of a more advanced or more aggressive exercise program. They have a vignette that shows that kind of category. And they have also a man that wants to play golf that's in his 70s that is worried about fracture. and they have a woman who is frail that is wanting to do an exercise program. So they've done a great job on these vignettes, and I try hard not to cry when I watch them because they're so good. They really are that good.
That's a great,
that's
such
so
a great
emotional.
resource. Yeah, that's such a great resource too, because we can, we can kind of fit in, okay, this is kind of what I do and it's similar to this. I can feel good about, giving that to this person. And yeah, that's a wonderful resource.
Right. I just feel like Laura is so smart that she individualizes the approach, because if somebody's been playing golf their whole life, there's no reason they should stop just because they find out they have osteoporosis, right? Because they want to play golf. That's their goal, to retire and play golf. And they've been doing it forever and they've never had a fracture. They might have low bone density, but if they've been doing that for so many years, they're probably going to be just fine to do it and to continue doing it. Mm. So I want to share with you a really important trial that's ongoing. Belinda Beck from Australia is at, I'm blanking on the college that she's at, Griffith University in Brisbane. And she is doing high intensity strength training trials. And she was the first to really branch out and really start doing this for osteoporotic women. She's done an 8-month, 2 times a week, 30-minute exercise trial, which I love that. It's really short. You only have to do 30 minutes of exercise, right? She did 4 exercises. She did 2 months of preparatory training with these women to make sure that they were ready to do it. And she actually said she was planning to do only 1 month, and she felt like she needed to do 2 months. They did a warm-up, 2 sets of deadlifts at 50 to 70% of 1 RM, and that's 1 repetition max. That would mean how much weight can you lift at your maximum effort 1 time. That's not really safe to do that. So we usually decrease the amount of weight, have somebody lift, say 10 times. And then if you get to fatigue within 10 repetitions, you're usually at about 70 to 80% of your 1 repetition max. Now she went on and did 80 to 85%, which means she did 5 sets of 5 repetitions. So she got to fatigue within 5 repetitions. And they did deadlift, back squat, and overhead press. And a back squat is just a barbell on your back doing a squat. And then they did chin-ups where they pull up and then drop landing. I have a video that Melissa's going to show in a little bit that I will share with you, the actual people doing the exercise. The 4th exercise, again, was impact loading, and that's why they call it high intensity in impact loading trial. The control group, they did stretching, walking, balancing, and low intensity strengthening, such as heel raises and lunges without resistance. Let's look at these people. There's an interview that was done by a news network that, if Melissa, you can play the video.
These women are working out to beat brittle bones.
Chin over the bar. Good, now come down.
It's a new way to prevent crippling osteoporosis, high-intensity weight training instead of low impact.
When you are older and you have osteoporosis, those kinds of exercises were always thought to be dangerous.
But the 8-month study by Griffith University has found the opposite.
Since this, I don't fall.
These women, all over 60, have built up bone mass and recorded less falls.
I had no strength whatsoever.
Now Robin Anderson is deadlifting
between 50 and 55.
Almost her body weight. Sue Salter's personal best is 72 kilos.
6.
We've had amazing results compared to the results that you typically see in the literature.
We do have some women who have fallen over, but they haven't broken a bone.
Because they are stronger.
Coming here, I've built up my spine 8%.
They tell me that my back is straightening up.
There are 6 million osteoporosis sufferers in Australia. Between them, they get a fracture every 3 minutes.
Doing a little pull-up,
the Bone Clinics program is scientifically designed and involves just 2 sessions a week.
I go home and I say I lifted 32 Ks today, and he's just amazed.
Beating osteo one.
See, I don't like the form of these 2 women. I think they can do better.
Smith, 7 News.
Yeah. So on paper, this trial looks so good, and it's really exciting. But when you watch those women working out, I think we can do better. I think as Pilates teachers, we can do much better. So let me show you the results of this trial. The controls actually lost lumbar spine bone density by minus 1.2%. And they lost bone density in their hip by minus 2%, whereas the high intensity resistance training group gained 2.9% in their lumbar spine and 0.3% in their hip. It doesn't seem like a lot in their hip, but look at this compared to the control group who were just doing some heel raises, you know, some squats and lunges without resistance. Right. So they were actually losing bone density, which is surprising to me because I really, you know, hung my hat on the fact that I could keep people strong with Pilates mat work, but you really do need to add a little bit of resistance. And it's not that much. If you spend 10 minutes of your class adding a little bit of resistance, you will benefit your patients and clients so much. So I'm really excited to share this with you. All right, so again, here is the schematic of what I just mentioned with the control group versus the high intensity resistance training group. And then this is also what they improved. Look how much they improved their leg extensor strength, their back extensor strength, which is so important for fracture prevention. They also improved a little bit their timed up and go, which is their gait speed test, their fine time sit to stand, their functional reach, and their vertical jump. And here you can see that the 49% participants improved femoral neck, improved lumbar spine. They also improved their height because they measured their standing height to see if they either kind of were shrinking or standing straighter with their back extensors, holding them up better, and reducing kyphosis is the reason for that height extension. Functional performance improved in, like I said, leg extensor strength by 37%, back extensor strength by 36%, faster gait speed, increased sit to stand leg strength, and improved balance, as noted by the functional reach test. So they're just going gangbusters. The other thing I'm going to mention about the LIFTMOR trials is that Clint Rubin has gone to Australia to test his vibration platform against her LIFTMOR trial. So they're doing a head-to-head comparison of vibration platforms with the LIFTMOR program. And Belinda Beck is excited about that. And they're not finished with the trial yet, but I'm sure they'll be publishing that soon.
Oh, that'll be really interesting.
That's going to be really interesting to see.
The vibration plates had a lot of claims. And it's nice to see if they really do have a positive effect. Yeah.
Yeah, I just talked with Laura John Gregorio, and she's still not recommending a vibration platform just yet. So she hasn't seen any evidence to sway her. And I have always had the opinion that I wasn't recommending them for bone density, for other things maybe, but not for bone density.
Right.
So we'll see what they say.
Interesting.
All right. So what I want to kind of send home with you guys is movement priorities. So first and foremost, protect your clients from fracture using the stick on their back to do functional activities. Can they touch the floor, doing the hip hinge, being able to do that without rounding their back, and having enough hip mobility to get to the floor, because a lot of people don't have enough hip mobility to be able to get to the floor without rounding their back. So you need to know that at the beginning of their program. And then avoiding risky movements like high impact sports, spinal flexion, deep side bending, and deep rotation. And then you always want to treat pain and biomechanical dysfunction before you start any bone building exercises. You want to instruct them in functional activities. It's like, I'm going to give you guys a little poll right now. What exercise in the Pilates studio includes a deadlift? So what do y'all think? So Sarah Edwards is an assisted squat. Elise, you saying ladder barrel, hamstring on the chair. I'm going to say no to all of those. Elephants, pelvic press, rowing, none of those. Pull up from Cadillac, footwork, somebody's going to get it. No, okay, hint. It's not an exercise that's in the repertoire from Return to Life, and it's not actually an exercise that you may have learned in your teacher training.
Does everybody know what a deadlift is?
Yeah, so that's okay. So I'm not gonna answer it yet, and then we'll see if you guys can figure it out. Okay, all right. So here's just a gym exercise example. So if you wanted to do an exercise program at the gym, these are the recommendations: leg press, back extension, rows, not endurance rowing, but just a rowing, like a rowing with a pulley. And then lat pull down to your chest, hip abduction, adduction, Roman chair back extension. Free weight exercises might be standing rows and pull downs, deadlifts or squats with a barbell, which I will discuss in a moment. lunges with hand weights or heel raises with hand weights. Now, if you want to do Pilates apparatus, which I know you're all here for, use reformer springs with footwork to load the lower extremity so that they get to fatigue within 10 repetitions. So you have to load them up pretty heavy. And there's some people that are so strong that they're not really going to benefit from doing all the springs on the second gear and then trying to, you know, get to fatigue within 10 reps. You're going to see that people are going to have a ceiling effect with that, and you can't really use the reformer to try to build bone density with the footwork exercise once they get to that point. And then, but weaker people can certainly do more high intensity strength training with the footwork on the reformer. You can do single leg footwork that will help with getting to fatigue within 10 repetitions using all the springs. And then double and single leg bridging, seated rows, overhead press and swimming. So this would be the just pulling straps, long stretches, plank and push-ups. You know, those kind of exercises might be really beneficial. And then always watching for safe spine posture. Then you can also do standing side splits with different foot positions. You can spring it so that they're getting more abduction resistance, and then stand wider to get more adductor resistance. You can do ease lunge, front split, Russian split, and then forward lunge and side lunge on the chair. And plus PRE means adding resistance. So if you wanted to put dumbbells in your hands and then add a little bit of resistance with that, you can certainly do that. Because the problem with the chair exercise, not the problem with it, but it's assisting people. So it's lighter than your body weight. And so you need to do just like maybe step ups onto a box to do more challenging exercises that are going to challenge those bones of the hip and spine. All right, so if you had to do exercises at home, you can do hip hinge squats, single leg standing heel raises, progressive lunges, adding resistance in the hands, or using even TheraBands underneath. I love to do the lunge with the TheraBand under the front foot because it gives you resistance in the part of the lunge that's usually a little bit easier. And as you go down, the TheraBand gets a little bit lighter. So then, of course, thoracic mobility over a round surface, which is not bone building, but certainly great for improving mobility in the thoracic spine. And then turning them right over, doing thoracic extensor strengthening with dumbbells, progressing, and then with a pillow under the ribs to protect the ribs.
Yeah, and I love that you have the picture of the woman doing the standing next to the chair with her hand up away from the chair. And I teach that anytime I'm teaching standing work, whether you have dowels, and of course I learned that from you, is if you need a dowel, hold it up in your hands and hold the dowel off of the floor until you need it. Otherwise and it's with anything, even the lightest fingertip touch, if you rely on that, you're not ever, you're not going to go past that. So I love that.
All right. And then here's your 70 to 80% of one repetition max. It would blend it back to 85%. Hip hinge deadlift. So here's your deadlift. Okay. So now you can start thinking more about your Pilates environment. And then your back squat with the weight on your back. You don't see either of those in Pilates, right? And then overhead press. And then you see an overhead kind of press on the reformer, right? Doing breaststroke, but or even putting your hands on the foot bar, but you don't really see an overhead press very often in the Pilates environment. You're going to have springs from above doing a pull down, but not so much overhead. And then your leg press and heel raises. And then I love the Roman chair. And what I love about it is that you can do it on the ladder barrel if you just go to the parallel to the floor and then go up. And then you don't hang all the way completely over into that rounded position, but just stop at a neutral position. So you can do it on the ladder barrel, just bring the ladder barrel all the way in and you can simulate that. And then you can add resistance if you want to. All right, so I know that was probably longer than I intended, but I wanted to add in the Pilates recommendations so that you can kind of trigger your mind about that. All right, so now what's the answer to my question about the deadlift in the Pilates studio? Let's see if anybody's got it.
I may have seen it. I don't know if it's what you're thinking about.
Okay. deadlift standing on the couch like with bottom loaded roll down bar. You could maybe, but the only thing is once you bend your knees and go down, you don't get any resistance. Step down. I'm hoping somebody's gonna get it. No, I don't see anything. Just doing a deadlift. Well, yeah. Where are you gonna do a deadlift? Well, I'm glad you're here because I'm gonna give you a really good, simple way to do it. Yeah, Shelly?
I think somebody said it. I'm curious if yeah, what you're gonna show is what somebody wrote.
Okay. So let me step away and let me get out of this screen here. All right. So let me step away and I'm going to grasp something that may jog your mind. Does this look familiar? Your clients can do a deadlift every time they pick the box up. Here's what I see. When people go and if they're getting their own box, right? Right? It looks horrible. Yeah, it makes me cringe. So I'm like, is this the way you pick up your suitcase and put it up on the scale at the airport, right? So how about if they tilt the box to the side, hip hinge, stand up, they go in front of their reformer and they do 10 squats with their box. Now, they're going to get a ceiling effect, right? They're not going to be able to, get the challenge. And so you just turn the box over, put a few free weights inside, and then they are going to have to grab that box. You're going to want handles with this because it is a lot wider than a box and you can't get it really close to you. So you won't be able to put as much weight in it. But anyway, there's your deadlift in the Pilates studio.
Yeah, so Emily Bondi said that.
Okay, we have to give her
maybe
a
other people did too, but I saw hers go by and I thought, oh, I bet that's what.
Oh, I missed it.
I bet that's what she's thinking. So well done.
Okay.
Well done.
So let's
Nice
see what's
to see.
in the question.
Yeah.
So Shelly, can you tell me what questions people are having?
Yeah, if you open up, you should be able to see them in the Q&A box. Can you?
Yep.
You can
okay.
see.
So yeah, it looked to me that they were loading the spine in flexion. Yes, I was so disappointed because on paper this trial was so exciting, but as soon as I saw the video of the people in the study doing the exercises, I was like, oh, I would never let my clients bend that much farther forward doing that.
Right.
So here's I think what is so important about getting someone to be able to do a deadlift properly. So if you're doing a deadlift, they have to be able to touch the floor with the 3 points of contact. And say you have somebody that looks like this, right? That they can't get their head to the stick because their back is rounded. And that may be the case with some people. They can still do lifting, but you're probably going to have to hold their head like this with their arm. And so I just kind of clamp the head with my arm, and then they can keep that point of contact there.
Right.
So they might not have their head against the stick, but they can still use the stick really well to use.
Could you put a cushion or something in between the stick and their head as well?
Yeah, so
something maybe.
I have a teeny tiny pillow that I love. Yeah, so you can either use like a half of a yoga block, or one of my clients gave me this great pillow and we used to always fight over this pillow at my studio. So you could do that.
Yeah.
And put a little cushion behind there.
Right.
And that works really great. But they have to be able to reach back there is the only thing. So a lot of times it's really hard for them to reach. And so I often just tie a TheraBand around their waist, and then they might have to put one around their chest too to keep it from twisting. And then they don't have to hold on to it at all.
Right.
But it's just really hard when they can't touch.
Yeah, I've actually slid it down. If somebody has a t-shirt that's tight enough, they can still kind of lightly hold, but it's down there in the shirt. That's helpful sometimes. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's a great,
but yeah,
I think
trick. They could benefit from that, and I know one lady in my live classes ties the stick to her back and does her whole exercise routine with stick on her back, because she just says, I really want to make sure, because she has back pain and she hurts if she doesn't do it correctly. So she really And she has such a strong pattern of bending at her mid back. It's just so hard for her.
Right.
The other thing I do a lot with people, if they're doing a deadlift, let me get my little box here. So this is my favorite deadlifting box, is I use a 12 by 12 inch box. It's just a file box from Staples or Office Max. And then we just put the box on the floor, and they can start doing some shoulder shrugs like that, so that they pull down and back. And because usually scapular protraction is coupled with thoracic flexion. And that one lady was just doing this and letting the box come down, right? So if you can do a little scapular retraction first and then stand up, and make sure that everyone stands all the way up, because I feel like you don't finish and then you don't get the loading through the spine, right? So really finishing the movement, I think, is really important too. And then you put, say you start with like 10 pounds, you have them do 10 reps, working up to 15. So if they can do 15 reps, then it's time to go up on the weight. Don't go up more than 1 to 2 pounds, because I felt like the people that have jumped up because they got excited have been the ones that have hurt their back. Not broken a bone or anything, but strained their back, right?
Right.
So then putting the hands under the box before you go up on the weight. So it's really great to go through that full hip range of motion. And then you can also have your feet pointed forward or turned out to the side if your hips are not quite as mobile. Because a lot of times people are more mobile with a turned out position.
Sure.
So you can do feet straight ahead or feet turned out, and just make sure that people get right on top of the box. So this is my funny cue. So I always have to do a pelvic floor kind of cue, but pretend like you're going to pee in the box if you're going to lift it. Because so many people, if I tell them, okay, I want to see how you lift, they'll get back here and try to lift something. Right? You got to get right on top of whatever you want to lift, right? So anyway, I can go on about that, but it's just so important if you're going to add deadlifting, that it's such a great exercise for both the hip and the spine, and it's so functional. And if we don't lift, we will gradually lose strength in our back. I have men that are afraid to deadlift because they've had back pain, and they avoid lifting, and it's just not in best practice.
Right. And it's so easy to progress if you just do it. I tell my classes all the time, it's like, if you don't ever practice a push-up or you don't ever practice a squat, it is I can't guarantee anything, except I can guarantee that will never improve. If you never do it in any way, it's never going to get better. So you have to start somewhere, and then just keep going. And I like that you've mentioned in a few of these that, with some of the things that we might be doing, there is that ceiling effect of, you can't do any more. You can't, so you've got to figure out a way where you can continue to increase load or increase repetitions, things like that. That's really important. And I know we had a bunch of questions come in. We've got questions in here. I just wanted to make one comment before we go to some of the questions. I loved watching the video and hearing the people talk about, I lifted this much today. And, I don't know if she was referring to her husband or somebody, like, my husband couldn't believe it. And I think it'd be really interesting, because we're always looking kind of at the self-efficacy. And, I know in the ICF model, there's a lot more of the biopsychosocial, like, what is somebody's belief? What do they feel? All these different things. It'd be cool to look at that too, of just, that's not necessarily going to increase their bone density, but does it have some, some correlation to health, and that they are more likely to continue doing what they're doing, and all of these things. I was really excited to hear that they were expressing some of those things, because that's, and it's contagious.
But I think life's too short to do exercise you don't enjoy. And you need to find out what motivates people and what people enjoy, so it's just like, I've had some people on other webinars where they're just, burn out, and it's like, change it up, do something different, find another exercise, do it with friends, go play tennis with your friends once a week, do a Pilates class once a week, do a Zumba class, go, mix it up, because that's also really effective. And you don't have to be doing the same thing over and over.
Right.
All right. So Katie is asking, would adding TheraBand to mat work count as enough resistance? I don't think if it's not in weight bearing, probably not going to be as effective, but it's better than not, probably. But it depends on what mat work you're doing. And, you know, the femur needs standing loading. And the femur is probably the hardest to build bone in. The spine is actually, as Belinda Beck has been showing, is easier sometimes to build bone in the spine. But, you know, I think that we need to be doing single leg heel raises, lunges with resistance, squats, you know, deadlifts with resistance, some back squats, things like that with resistance from above. And the overhead press, you know, I love that. Let me show you this really quick. So this is something you can do with your TheraBand. I have 2 different colors of TheraBand because most of my clients don't have long TheraBands of the same color. So I've got my green one on one side and my blue one on the other. So I'm gonna situate it so that my blue one, because it's a heavier one, is a little bit longer than my green one, okay? And then I'm gonna pull it to my chest, and then I'm gonna do an overhead press. Super easy thing to add to mat classes, super easy thing to add to your session. And you can do your overhead press like that. So we do it front to the chest, we do it to the top of the head, and then we, you know, try to get people to where they can do it behind their head without actually bending their head forward, right? So pulling back, really challenging to try to get the bar behind the head. And I seriously spend 10 to 15 minutes doing those 4 exercises before my session starts on the mat. So I will do those 4 exercises. I'll do some dynamic balance things. I always think of this exercise I learned from Serafino. I taught it on 4th of July, where he called it the Statue of Liberty. It was just cracking me up. So it was something like this. So we did it with some dumbbells on the 4th of July, you know.
Right.
So that was really fun. But anyway, I always think of him when I do the Statue of Liberty exercise.
And people have to remember that it's not only is it okay, but it is necessary to lose your balance a little bit to gain your balance.
Right.
So, you know, stop focusing on, oh, I had to put my foot down or I had to do something.
Right.
Who cares? I mean, unless, you know, obviously you want people to be safe, but just do it. And if you struggle for a while, that's okay. Just let it, you know, just keep practicing it. Yeah.
Yes. And I love an exercise like the lawnmower pull where you're on one leg. You can add resistance if you want to. So my beginners might have a dowel and they're just doing it like that.
Yeah.
My more advanced people have one leg lifted, and more advanced than that can do a little, let's see if I can do it. One leg lifted and do a pull. You know, so you're really getting that back work and balance and dynamic stability.
Great. There were a lot of questions, Sherri, and I've actually had a lot of people ask me, I think because I know you, they think I know the answer. What are your thoughts about jumping? Who is it appropriate for? Who might it not be appropriate for? Jumping on the reformer.
Yeah,
so
on the reformer. Okay.
Yes.
I think the reformer jumping is a great preparation for real jumping. And I think it's a wonderful tool. I use it for my ballet dancers. I use it for point preparation for my ballerinas. I use it for gymnasts who need to work on their landing skills. And I use it for older adults who want to play tennis or some kind of volleyball, you know, some kind of sport like that. If somebody's going to do jumping, I know that Christine Snow from Oregon State University did a jumping program where she stood on a Reebok step and then she did the jumping down, and that was shown to have some good effects in postmenopausal women. Now, the Cochrane review that we based our recommendations on didn't recommend jumping for postmenopausal women. So again, I don't use the reformer to try to build bone density really, but I use it more for a preparation because I can see so much about alignment when I'm right over top of their feet.
Right.
And I can see when they're rolling the foot, I can see when they're rolling the ankle or pronating. And it's just a great tool for re-education and corrective movement and preparation of someone for jumping.
So
but I wouldn't use it for osteoporosis. Yeah, I think so.
But it's okay. There's no danger in having somebody jump.
I don't think so,
there?
because their spine is very supported.
Right.
And if like an older adult wants to do some jumping, how fun would that be? You know, just how liberating, and really just let them have some fun. It's kind of like jumping on a trampoline, right?
Right.
So I actually want to go to some questions that came in advance that I promised to answer.
Yeah.
So let me, oh gosh, I could be here all day. I wish I could stay and
Well, and
do more.
we see a lot of questions come in, and of course, you know, Sherri had so much to present that we can't get to all the questions. But if there are kind of themes of questions, we're happy to put those in so that they can get updated in the post recording email that Melissa puts together. So we can answer some of those too. So, but yeah,
Okay.
go for it.
So these, I'm going to ask Melissa to add in these links to the follow-up, so you'll have live links to look at. But Robert Voorhees was a previous, Shelly, do you remember him? He took the Polestar program a long time ago, and he's in Jupiter. And he wrote a really nice summary after he took my osteoporosis course on Pilates exercises that were safe and unsafe for osteoporosis, and kind of why flexion is contraindicated. And then here's 2 articles that I wrote for Idea Fit that explain that as well. And read anything by Stuart McGill. Here's a really nice summary of Stuart McGill's recommendations and why flexion is contraindicated. And the question that someone had that sent in their question, let me just go to that question. Let's see. Hold on a second. I'm going to skip that part. Yeah. So that was the bone density. I'm going to go back. All right. So this is a super long question, but mainly what she's asking is, why is flexion contraindicated? And if the person is lengthening and using their abdominals and supporting their spine, you know, isn't there some benefit to stretching the thoracolumbar fascia? And so those particular references were what I was trying to send. So here is another explanation of, as soon as you flex, 14 degrees is what each vertebra has. So as soon as you flex the lumbar spine or the thoracic spine, you're immediately going to start tensing up the ligaments that are around the spine. So probably before the thoracolumbar fascia actually stretches. So a thick thoracolumbar fascia of someone that cannot reverse their lumbar curve is going to be really tight, right? And it limits lumbar flexion. Well, that's actually going to put more pressure on the lumbar spine. So someone that's trying to stretch out their thoracolumbar fascia may end up fracturing an osteoporotic spine because they're trying so hard to flex, and that thick fascia is limiting it. So that person has to be even more careful. And that's why I think that people that have bulky, you know, musculature, so say men who are trying to flex, if they have low bone density, they need to be very careful, because the tighter they are and the more restricted that fascia is, the more at risk they are for fracture with flexion. So what I would recommend is doing myofascial release, or, you know, some technique to release the fascia that's not putting the spine in too much flexion. And then if they really enjoy stretching, supported flexion is what is recommended by Laura John Gregorio. And she just talked about this on a Twitter feed too. So doing something like a half down dog like this, and then maybe extended child's pose with straight arms, and really having that support, and then flexing through the lumbar spine this way. She also recommended doing downward facing dog, putting your hands, say, on a chair like this, and doing more supported flexion like that. So it would look like a lot like the elephant, or not with a rounded back, but more like inverted V on the reformer.
Right.
So that's how I would kind of quickly address that question from her. And there are a plethora. There are 2 papers talking about fractures from yoga that are in the flexed postures, and what is recommended and what poses are not recommended. And there's a newer one that has come out that I'll share with you as well. So again, here's the recommendations from Dr. John Gregorio from Osteoporosis Canada: spinal movements to limit, and combined flexion, bending forward, slouching, rotation, twisting, side bending, combinations of movements at especially the end range, and then making sure you're reducing the cumulative effect of flexion, slouching, rotations in daily life. So repetitive movement is also difficult. So she often recommends to golfers that they do 9 holes instead of 18. they want to continue to golf, and then certainly care when lowering a heavy weight from overhead.
Right.
This is a person doing, you know, rounded movement. This is coming from University of Waterloo. Supported flexion, as I mentioned. Okay.
Great.
And then there are different ways to measure bone density. Which one is the best? There is the DEXA scan, which everyone knows about, but there's also the DEXA scan with the TBS added to it. And that is trabecular bone score, that actually looks at quality of movement, of quality of bone. And then the TBS is just software that's added to the DEXA. So you just have to call your bone densitometry center and ask for that. There's also something called Echo Light, which is an ultrasound based, that's not widely available in the United States yet. But that is another one. But still, the DEXA is the gold standard. The vertebral fracture assessment might be something you'd want to do if you suspect that you've had a fracture, and that's just a side X-ray of the vertebral spine, the vertebral body. And then the last question that came in advance was, walking does not improve bone density, but what about hill walking? I did find a paper that had some benefit to doing hill walking, that showed some increase in the intervention group versus the control group. So I will share that with you guys too.
I can't believe it's already been our hour.
Yeah.
It makes me, I'm pretty sure we could just stay on for another hour and just keep talking about this. So please, 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 we see all of your questions. Those of you that have put questions into the Q&A here today, we will answer those because we didn't have an opportunity to get to all of that. If you have a question right now that you want answered, put it into the Q&A so that we can see that, and we'll make sure that we have answers for you when it goes out in the post-show email, because Melissa's great about including links and all kinds of information there. Anything, Sherri, that you want to share with the audience before we finish up today?
Well, I just want to encourage you to don't feel like you have to just stop doing Pilates in the way that you know it. You have a beautiful method, and then it's so important to have people be aware of their movements, and teaching people moving with more consciousness, more awareness is so important for fracture prevention. And then thinking about, you know, how am I going to introduce load to the spine? How am I going to teach somebody how to carry something, how to put something on a high shelf, how to put their suitcase on the scale if they're going to travel, how to put their suitcase in the overhead bin if they're going to travel. I think that if people are going to travel, they need to be independent and be strong enough to do that. I know there are certain cases where someone has been ill and they're not strong enough to travel alone, but it's just thinking of, how am I going to make this person's life better? Isn't that what we're doing as Pilates teachers? Making people's lives better and being more effective with our exercise. And that was something that I had to really look at. And what keeps me awake at night is making sure that I'm teaching the most effective exercise for my patients and clients, and really helping them achieve their goals and keep them independent and pain-free the rest of their lives. So That's what I would like to leave you with.
That's such great advice. And really, we should be thinking about that with all our clients prior to prior to their 50s, when they might start seeing, their bone changes, or even earlier, is, how can we get our teenagers and how can we get our young people to adopt some better habits and, all of that. So that's really wonderful advice. And we need change. Like, we can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting, something. So I think that's super important information. Thank you so much, Sherri. This has been really wonderful, a wonderful hour.
Thanks, Shelly.
We'll have you back.
Great.
For sure.
Thank
I'm sure we can
you.
have a part 2 or part 3. And thank you to all of you that joined, all of you that signed up and are getting the recording. Keep doing it. Really exciting next week. Brent is back next week, and I was really happy to be able to guest host. So thank you, Brent, for letting me do this. Next week, Kate Strozak is going to be on. Kate's a full-start educator in the Chicago area, and she's going to be talking about neuro concepts and Pilates. So please tune in. And again, remember, these webinars are really for anybody. Share the links, share the email so that people can sign up. They get the recording, clients, friends, family. And as Brent would say, it's a good day. What does he say? A good day to have a good day. Please be kind, take care of one another, and we will see you again in another Pilates hour.